Most of us woke up this morning to what we think is pretty hopeful news. You have a lead candidate working together with an element of HHS. You have a lead candidate for a vaccine. How hopeful should we be?
Well, David, first of all, thank you for having me on this morning. And you're right, like many of your viewers, I spent the weekend reviewing the news, talking with friends and family and colleagues. And obviously, there's a lot of despair out there, right? Rightfully so, when you think about how people are being impacted by this. But I've also got to say, I do think that there is some reason to be optimistic when I see some of the partnering and collaboration. And that's really what this is about this morning, our announcement about partnering with the U.S. government to accelerate the development of our vaccine. Now, what I would always say in these cases is, we need to be thoughtful, and we're very hopeful as we look at our early data that in these cases tends to be, quite correlated with what we would expect to see as we take this into human testing in September of this year. But we also know we need to complete those other trials, and we'll be doing that. At the same time, we're going to be ramping up our production, and we'll have global production. We expect to have that both in Europe as well as the United States. And we expect to be in a position by the first quarter to have a much better perspective on the vaccine itself, on the kind of quantities that we would have available. Our goal is to have hundreds of millions available by that time. And then obviously to work with regulators and other people around the world, depending on where the coronavirus is at that time, to try to make this accessible on an emergency basis.
Alex, give us a sense of what that testing process is. Is it the normal testing process you'd have for another vaccine, or given the urgency and the size of this problem, are there certain things that can be done to expedite that?
Well, David, look, my sense is that regulators, both in Europe and the United States, let alone around the world, other healthcare authorities and the government are doing everything they can to expedite this. At the same time, we have to balance that to make sure that we gather the efficacy, the safety data that's so important before, of course, we would be using this on a large scale. Now, in this particular case, we're working with a platform. So think of it as a vaccine, part of a vaccine, where we've got significant experience in areas like SARS, things like Ebola, things like HIV. And so we are confident in the safety data that we've seen thus far. And it's already, the vector's been used in elderly. It's been used in younger children. So that gives us confidence from a safety perspective. The early testing that we've done so far, that includes a range of animal as well as in vivo testing, also indicates that we should have an active vaccine as well. But of course, we need to complete the trials that we'll be doing in humans in the fourth quarter, before we develop the final data set, that would help us make that decision at the appropriate moment.
So to push ahead and push perhaps farther than we should, if you were successful in the fourth quarter, when would we have a vaccine available to people?
So, David, look, what we would intend to do, again, work closely with regulators so that by late December or early January, we would expect to have some type of interim analysis in our first-in-human trials. And then at that point, we would have to take a look at that data set in its totality. I think clearly we would be also looking at how is the virus proceeding and what kind of state is it in around the world, and then make a decision. So I think at some point in the second quarter, we could be in a position, again, on an emergency basis, depending on where the pandemic is going, where there could be some access to this, and then we would expect that to ramp up significantly over the rest of the year.